Recently, Brand South Africa and Brand Africa Finance came out with their third annual study of the top 50 corporate brands in South Africa, which are valued at approximately R1.5 trillion. This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, we ask if the study translates into people voting with their wallets for those revered brands. Joining me with hopefully some answers, Brand South Africa's Chief Executive, Kingsley Makubela, and Brand Africa Finance Chairperson, Thebe Ikalafeng. But first, before we go into the study itself, I wonder what the brand value of SAB Miller has done. The share price of SAB Miller up 20% on the news that AB InBev has approached the board of SAB Miller with the potential of making an offer. We saw the share price of SAB Miller spike up to 750 Rand a share. Thebe Ikalafeng, it makes it on the top 50 brands list in terms of the value of the brand, but when a share price moves in 20% in a day, suddenly this report looks old.
Of course, because that means that the brand value of it is going to move higher. But of course, then it'll be starting at 3.5 compared to, if you look at MTN, at 54 billion. So it's still quite a ways to catch up with the number one brand on the most available brands in South Africa.
What I love about this list of number one brands in South Africa is in the top 20 you've got Castle Lager. Number 33 is SAB Miller. How can a product brand be more valuable than the mothership, which is global?
Because of the brand equity that rests in Castle. People don't buy SAB Miller, they buy Castle Lager. Now, one of the things that we look at when we measure brand valuation is what we call, we look at the brand strength of the brand. And the brand strength is made up of three important critical things. One is made of the brand support, and you know Castle is the most supported brand in terms of advertising spend and all those in the SAB Miller. The second thing we look at the brand equity, and brand equity really has to do with how people relate to the brand and where the brand sits in there. And the third thing that we look at the brand performance. It's a number one performing brand.
So this is going to sound a little bit sacrilegious. So whoever owns Castle doesn't matter. So if AB InBev is successful, if it makes a pitch for SAB Miller and it buys SAB Miller, provided AB InBev maintains the integrity of Castle Lager, Castle Lager remains a top brand.
Castle Lager is the cash cow of SAB Miller. It's the most premium brand they have there, and it's the most supported brand. So, of course, whoever buys it, they will know who pays the bills.
What's interesting is Carling Black Label, which is not a South African brand, makes it onto the list as well. It's America's favorite beer, isn't it? That's what the 1970s ads used to say. I don't know what they say now, but then it was America's favorite beer. How does that make it onto the list if it's not even South African?
Well, the brands which make it onto this list are the brands which are owned by companies which are South African. So if SAB Miller is a South African company and it owns Carling and it owns Miller, those are South African brands.
20 years ago, Kingsley Makubela, the top two brands didn't exist. MTN and Vodacom. MTN by far and away the most valuable brand in South Africa, twice as valuable as its next closest contender, Vodacom. That's a good South African story, I suspect.
Of course, the nation is creating wealth. The wealth creation process is going on, and it's driven by the private sector. I mean, if you look at MTN and Vodacom, they have created wealth in the last 20 years, actually. Now, look at how they've grown. Not only grown domestically, they've created footprints around the world. MTN, it's in the Middle East, they are in Iran, they are in most part of the continent. So there is a footprint of the South African story emanating from 1994.
In the top 10, half of them are banks. Is that a surprise to you?
It's not a surprise. Actually, if you look at our financial performance in the country, we rank number 7. We're doing very well in terms of systems. Our own securities in the financial system is working very well, highly competitive, best system that are in place, and thanks to a very large extent also in terms of the working relation that is there amongst major banks and the Reserve Bank.
So certainly it's interesting to see the banks coming through there, Standard Bank, the most valuable brand, despite all the money that FNB has thrown at the problem of branding, Thebe.
Well, FNB is the strongest brand in South Africa.
It's the strongest brand, but no, it's not the most valuable.
It's not the most valuable. Because
you branding guys.
I've explained to you how we come up to the strongest brand. And what FNB has done very well, they've invested a lot, of course, in defining their brand, in ensuring that their brand connects to the majority of South Africans Africans, and investing a lot as well in customer service. And that has built the brand equity of FNB, of course, with the support that they put behind the brand. But of course, the other point I wanted to add on to Kingsley's point is that the reason the financial services are so top on the list and the telecommunications sectors are because those are the two categories which enable businesses and people to connect and to transact. They are enabling categories, and that's why you should expect them to see there and be top of mind.
Now, what's really interesting here is that a little birdie tells me, and there are lots of little birdies, that the Absa brand is as good as dead, that there is a process underway with Barclays Africa. We've known it's coming for a long time, and they made a statement the other day which gave the clearest indication yet that this is on the table. The ad agencies tell me they're doing mock-ups of Barclays up on every Absa brand. Is there not confusion between Absa and Barclays Africa? They still rank very highly on this list, but there is an interesting sort of break coming, Kingsley.
Well, they haven't made a decision.
They haven't made a decision, Kingsley. They just haven't said so.
Until that decision is announced, yeah. So we wait for the official announcement whether do we still have Absa brand or are we going to have Barclays brand.
But the one thing you cannot deny is that Absa itself as a brand is a very strong South African brand. So Barclays is looking at it more as a Pan-African corporate story.
So how much risk are they taking then by disposing of the Absa brand? Because you know it's going to happen.
Well, they are going to have to invest a lot in changing that brand. Now look at Vodacom, for example. So Vodafone had an interesting transition because they also were faced with quote-unquote a similar dilemma, if you will, because they had a decision of do we change everything from the blue Vodacom that we know to the red Vodafone?
See,
You've forgotten already. But what they've done a stage transition. They've kept the name Vodacom, but the entire iconography and everything is Vodafone. So it is pretty much as good as Vodafone, and in time it will be Vodafone. But I think Absa Barclays is a more interesting story because their challenges, why they're having in the boardroom now, is what do we do with this brand equity that we have in South Africa? And the Barclays guy says, what do we do with this brand equity we have in the rest of the world and the rest of the continent? So they said, listen, it's a matter of if you put in enough brand support behind the new Barclays in South Africa, you will get the results. And I think they will as well.
Is there space on the Springbok rugby jerseys for Barclays? And can you put Barclays on a Springbok rugby jersey? But that's another story altogether. This isn't only about the private sector, it's about public sector companies as well. Some of the biggest companies in South Africa, Kingsley, are government, state-owned entities, and I see one of them, despite the fact that it can't make a profit, doesn't know how to make a profit, and is unlikely ever to make a profit, is South Africa's flag carrier, the carrier that carries brand South Africa to the world, and that's SAA. It doesn't have to make money to have a valuable brand.
No, South African Airways is still transporting a lot of people around the continent. If you look at how they move in the Middle East, in North Africa and East Africa, it's still a very dominant carrier. And South Africa Airways is still a big carrier in terms of bringing a lot of people into the country. So you cannot discard that despite the challenges that they are having. The reports that they are saying they're not making enough money, but it's still a huge brand that needs really some level of recognition in terms of their contribution into our economy.
No, the brand value is great.
The primary driver, if you look at all those top 50, you'll notice one thing about them. These are the brands that we can't live without.
I know Telkom's on there.
So if you can't live without that either. But if you look at all of them, you almost say, in a day, I don't think I can live my life without at least 20% of those brands being part of who we are. But the key thing that we need to look at about these brands and why this ranking is so important is that the more these brands grow and the more these brands thrive, it means we are creating jobs in the country, we are creating tax revenue. The tax revenue can fund some of the public goods, but most importantly, for Brand South Africa, holistically, we are creating a reputation as a nation of entrepreneurs and a nation of brand builders.
Yeah, I buy that completely. What's interesting about this is you've got MTN and Vodacom at the top of the list, number 1 and 2, falling fastest down the charts, Asaka DJ doing the top 40, but Telkom down from position 19 to position 26. Yet the market capitalization, and this is where people get a bit confused between market value and brand value, because the market capitalization of Telkom is stratospheric, whereas the brand value is decreasing. Explain that dichotomy to me.
Well, the market value, as you know, market capitalization value, as you know, is pretty much the share multiplied by the number of shares. That's a simple calculation that sits on the bed. But the brand value is if you had to throw everything else out, if you had to throw out the buildings, throw out the equipment, and you sell the brand itself, what will that brand be worth? That's what that speaks to. That's what the brand value really speaks to holistically.
No, Kingsley, this is a proud story for South Africa to tell. This is a proudly South African story. Great South African businesses, a lot of them founded in the last 20 years. You look at the emergence of, for example, of the cell phone companies. Capitec has emerged there as well. Woolworths is going from strength to strength. Media24 is in there. Bank brands are really strong. What strikes me is that the top 50 brands are not going to switch very dramatically in the next 20 years because we don't have new feedstock coming in. Does that worry you as the champion of brand South Africa?
Not quite. I think the brands that we are having now, we're going to look at the top 100 brands in the next few weeks. But the brands that we are having here, they need to grow in order to be able to compete around the world because they're going to find challenges. So it's very important for these brands to keep on growing from strength to strength. I don't think there's any threat. I mean, look at the business model of Capitec. And it's a game changer in my own view. The manner in which they're dealing with business, how they are reaching out to ordinary people, is going to change the game, the manner in which we bank, how we interface with our banks, ordinary people. And I think big banks are looking at that. Look at them. They've grown 60% in terms of the brand value within a short space of time. So that's a game changer.
Okay.
And of course, the other thing to look at as well is if you look at perhaps the international brands, the top 100 in the world, there's not much change there. Even in the last 10 years, you've only had the Googles, for example, the Facebooks coming into play.
We don't have that kind of feedstock coming through. And we've got lots of great entrepreneurial ventures going on, people playing on the periphery. But where's the next Adrian Gore going to come from? Where's the next Alan Knott Craig who created Vodacom? Where's the next team, the Paul Edwardses of the world and the Irene Chandleys who brought together MTN in the early days? Do we have them?
I think if when the small business department, which is established, was established with that in mind, to say how do we catalyze, how do we inspire entrepreneurship among the young people, and how do we enable it to happen? I think when that kicks in and it really begins to work, and the banks and the telecoms enable this to happen, we will have that pipeline because South Africa has got a pipeline of people with great ideas. So the fact that these were created 20 years ago does not mean that we don't have that same stock in our continent and in our country.
20 years from now, we're sitting here with hearing aids on, and hopefully you'll be proven to be right as we have that discussion 20 years from now. Brand Africa Finance Chairperson Thebe Ikalafeng and the Brand South Africa Chief Executive Kingsley Makubela on tonight's Moneymakers. Thank you for watching. Till tomorrow night, good branding and good night.